TSN's Motoring 96 is brought to you by Quaker State. The big Q stands for quality, always has, always will, and Midas, the way it should be.
You know, when they look back on the 90s and discuss what was hot in automobiles, it'll be quite simple. Minivans and sport utilities. Well, we know why people buy minivans, but sport utilities? Well, as we've said on this program many times, most owners never realize half the technology put in their vehicle. As Jim Kenzie likes to say, the closest most owners get to the great outdoors is by throwing a bag of peat moss in the back of their sport utility. Well, this week we're meeting the granddaddy of sport utilities, a vehicle that was born to go on the trail. One of the most recognized names in the world, in any language, of course, the Jeep.
The Jeep made its debut on the battlefields of World War II. It was known as the Willie and driven by G.I. Joe. After the war, the Jeep was used by farmers as a utility vehicle, and hence the name Sport Utility. In 1987, Chrysler bought AMC Motors and inherited the Jeep. With the sport utility market booming, Chrysler is now introducing its newest version of the Jeep for 1997, dubbed the TJ, which replaces the YJ. With the new TJ, Chrysler wants to take a bigger bite of the sport utility market, but at the same time was sensitive to the Jeep's history and current owners.
One of the first things that a lot of them told us, they said, the look of the Jeep. Don't mess with that too much, is what a lot of our study groups, focus groups told us. They said, we like the look of it. We don't want it to get into more of the, very aerodynamic shapes that you have in the 90s for vehicles. They said, keep the look so that there's no mistaking a Jeep. However, what they did want to see was refinements to the dash in the Jeep. We added a dual airbags for the first time to the vehicle, and the other part was the suspension. What they found with the old one, the stiffer ride with the leaf springs was great for off-roading, but on the day-to-day jaunts around town, and a lot of people that are buying that vehicle wanted something a little more refined. So basically what we've given them is a Grand Cherokee suspension, the quadra-coil suspension.
The saddle axles are what the prior Jeep owners really want to keep, and we kept that with this model. We have coil springs to the corners of the vehicle, and the coil springs allow a lot of articulation, a lot of travel for the suspension. As you know, when you're going over rocks, you want to keep the travel, but you want a lot of ground clearance, and we've been able to gain a lot of ground clearance by keeping solid axles. The chassis, we've strengthened the chassis a lot more than the prior YJ. We've also made the body an integral system of the chassis and frame. So the body and especially the sport bar help stiffen the frame, help make the vehicle a lot stronger than what it used to be before.
The TJ will offer a 120 horsepower 2.5-liter 4 and a 180 horsepower 4-liter 6, with a choice of a 3-speed automatic or a 5-speed manual box. The soft top is standard with an optional hard top.
When we decided, or we're trying to figure out what type of a program we should put together to really show the capabilities of this vehicle, we had one of our people arrange what we call Jeep Jamboree to really take them off-road. So we brought them out here to a Soyuz, and as you saw yesterday, we went from virtually sort of sea level up to 7,000 feet into the mountains over the most incredible type of terrain. We were able to take a stock vehicle that virtually out of the box with no add-ons or suspension tuning, run off the highway and start climbing trails that hardly mountain goats can get up. So we're very pleased with the capability of it.
I drive a 1994 Jeep YJ, and compared to the TJ, there really is no comparison. The TJ is far more superior in handling, capability, power. Just basically everything about the TJ outweighs the YJ in every shape and form. The TJ, in its pulling power, going off-roading it just pulls non-stop. In which with the YJ, you don't feel that pulling as much. You don't feel whether your wheels are actually grabbing the surface below you as you do in the TJ.
Well, I didn't find a lot of lows with this one. The old ones were just a little bit skittish when you got on rough gravel, washboard. These ones will handle it really well as any half-ton. It's a much safer vehicle than it was, I guess is the best way to put it. The dual airbags, the interior's neater. You sort of get back to a little tradition, but it's got a lot more wheel travel. Things work a lot better. And as I said, if you get on washboard and things like, you can know you're going to go in a straight line. You're not going to end up in the ditch somewhere if you're doing 80K.
The old Jeep had the live axle leaf spring front suspension, which dated probably back to the Second World War. And the new one with the quadricoil suspension handles much better and steers much better. And off-road, significant improvements in the amount of wheel travel and the ride.
We're definitely trying to get the best of both worlds. Even though the majority of the people do not use the vehicle for off-roading, they still want to have the identity of being able to go off-roading. But again, those that are driving on-road in major centers, major cities across Canada want to have the smoother ride, and they now have that smooth ride.
This is the 1997 Pontiac Grand Prix, a vehicle with a split personality. It's aimed at those with family commitments, but those that don't want to give up the pleasure of driving a sports car. Have they got the ingredients right? We intend to find out.
Power for the GP comes from GM's bulletproof 3.8-litre 3800 Series 2 V6 engine. Horsepower is rated at 195 at 5200 RPM and torque at 230 at 3600. Nudge the gas pedal and the GP moves off smartly because of the early tip in GM favour. Mid and high range performance is also much better than average for a family sedan, albeit one with a decidedly sporty flavour. For the record, the run through the 100k mark takes a tad over 8 seconds. The only box offered is a 4-speed automatic with overdrive. Again, no complaints. The shifts are smooth and the kickdown prompt. The platform features a wheelbase that is 3 inches longer than the previous model. The result is a lot more interior room.
The Grand Prix comes one way, and that's loaded. Power windows, locks, mirrors, cruise control, auxiliary buttons for the radio and climate control themselves. Very easy to reach, very easy to operate, and they have a nice uniform tactile feel to all of the controls. The other thing they've done in redesigning the interior, all the important information is kept as high up as possible. The result, you can read it relying upon peripheral vision, which allows you to keep your eyes on the road. A couple of very minor quibbles back here. First of all, the very heavy sculpting in the middle of the seat turns this into more of a 2+2 than a true 3-seater. The other thing, you get comfy, my head becomes very intimate with the back glass. Now, in order to avoid that, I have to slouch, and on a long trip, this is not the most comfortable position to be in. The Grand Prix comes with a tyre monitoring system. Now, the system uses the ABS sensors to monitor the rolling radius of each of the tyres. If you begin to get a tyre that's going flat, obviously the rolling radius is going to change. The ABS sensors alert the driver can then check the tyre. It's very simple, very safe, and very clever. Now, usually I'm fairly mild-mannered and things don't get up my nose, but this Grand Prix really did. Every time you put it into park, it locks the doors and you've got to actually unlock it every time somebody wants to get out. Now, yes, you can reprogram it. However, that entails fishing around in here, pulling this lot out, finding a fuse, pulling it out, setting the whole lot up, put the fuse back, put the dash back together again. It just goes on and on. Somebody should come up with a much more user-friendly way of turning this bloody awful system off.
The suspension features the usual McPherson struts with coil springs and a stabilizer bar up front, while the rear benefits from a tri-link coil-over strut, again with stabilizer.
One of the big areas of improvement is found in the suspension design. It's a lot more supple than the old one, and a lot of the harshness that was a problem with the previous Grand Prix is completely gone. The beauty is that they've achieved this suppleness without sacrificing the handling characteristics. And that, at the best of times, is a very difficult balancing act.
Helping the overall feel is GM's MagnaSteer variable assist power steering. Unlike many other systems, this design uses magnetics as well as the usual hydraulics to achieve the desired level of assist. Factor in the longer wheelbase, wider stance, P225 60/16 tyres, and the handling and agility is the equal of the ride comfort. Of particular note is the lack of understeer. It only rears its ugly head if you really start to welly the GP into corners. Stopping power is also much better than before. Mindful of the complaints of past, they have significantly upgraded the design. First, the rotors are heavier, meaning they are less predisposed to warping. The front calipers have also been beefed up. The result is a much stronger pedal feel, one that is completely devoid of the mushiness of old. ABS is standard and functioned to perfection.
Well, that's it for this edition of Test Drive in Montreal. You know, GM have done a great job with the new Grand Prix. It's got grace, it's got space, and thanks to one of the best V6 engines offered anywhere in the world, it's got pace. And it's yours for merely $28,000. So what's the catch? Just looks far too much like the good old Grand Am.
It's time to bid our long-term Taurus a fond farewell. Despite the unusual power steering problem, things worked out well, and so in the final analysis, the Taurus has to be considered one of the better buys if you're looking for room, comfort and respectable fuel economy. Over the 5 or so months we lived with the Taurus, it more than earned its stripes. Be it a round-town errand or on a long-distance drive, the car feels equally at home. And so to the final numbers.
Few problems up here on Mount Baldy in British Columbia. Now the question is, was it the driver or the Jeep TJ that got stuck in the mud up here? Well, nobody's going to admit to it, so let's go to the garage and join Bill Gardner.
This week what we want to talk about is one of the many emission control devices on today's vehicles. It's been around for quite some time. It's called the EGR valve. It stands for exhaust gas recirculation. Now, it's a pretty simple little valve, and it has a huge effect on the performance and the drivability of your engine, especially if it's not working correctly. Now, the reason we've got the engine running is the fact that the EGR valve, first of all, doesn't even operate until the engine is A, up to temperature, and B, has the throttle somewhat open. Those are two important parameters for EGR valve operation. We're going to have a look at one on this half-ton pickup truck today, show you how it works, and some of the simple checks you can make on it to see if it's working properly. Because if it's not, you're going to have some big-time problems. Okay, there's the location of the EGR valve in this 350 V8 engine, right there. Now the function of the EGR valve is to reintroduce a certain portion of the exhaust gas back into the engine for recombustion. One component of the exhaust stream of your vehicle's engine is what we refer to as oxides of nitrogen. It's a very harmful emission. We need to control it, and it's the function of the EGR valve to control it. And it does so by limiting the combustion chamber temperature of our vehicle and keeping it below approximately 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Below that threshold, oxides of nitrogen are produced in very small quantities, but above 2,500 degrees there's a tremendous increase in the production of oxides of nitrogen. The EGR valve keeps that under control. Now when we flip the throttle, you can see the EGR valve opening. Now here's an EGR valve that we've removed from another engine. You can see a little bit closer, and when we apply vacuum to it, you can see that it opens up. There's a rubber diaphragm in the back here that pulls this little pintle valve open. Now the exhaust gas is always exposed to one of the two ports on this valve, and anytime the valve opens, it's going to reintroduce exhaust gas back into the intake manifold of our engine for recombustion. Remember, of course, that the engine has to be A, up to operating temperature, and B, throttle open before the EGR valve operates. And those are two important things you should check if you've got a problem with pinging on your engine, because the EGR valve's operation has a huge effect on pinging. If the EGR does not open when the engine's up to temperature and throttle open, you're for sure going to have a heck of a pinging problem. Now, another problem that can happen with EGR valves is they get carboned up, as this one is, and they can actually stick open. And if they stick open on idle, your idle will go all lumpy and it may cause stalling. It'll certainly cause rough engine operation. So those are a couple of things that you may want to have your mechanic check. If you've got a rough idle problem or a pinging problem, check the EGR valve. It may be the root of your problem. Now, in many cases, motorists have tried using higher octane fuel. In many cases, that may alleviate the problem, but this could be the root cause of it. So check that out closely. Until next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 96.
Toronto City Hall was the scene for a celebration of propane. And no, this had nothing to do with the barbecue season. University students from across North America had just completed the Propane Vehicle Challenge, converting 13 Chrysler minivans from gasoline to propane. Propane is used as a fuel by more than 350,000 vehicles in the United States and close to 200,000 in Canada.
Well, the criteria for this one was to develop a propane-powered vehicle, dedicated propane, and get a good balance of emissions, range, fuel economy, and performance. They were looking for a vehicle which was essentially the same as a stock gasoline vehicle in all of those areas. And so each team took that and then worked on their own design and their own conversion based on what they thought was the best thing.
Chrysler Canada has been a big supporter of alternate fuel vehicles. Chrysler is the leader in this area, and we've sponsored this and been the host for this competition. We have donated 13 minivans to 13 universities in North America for students to convert these vehicles to propane completely on their own designs, their own techniques. We continue to be interested in alternative fuels, and we're going to follow this up next year by having Chrysler be a continuing sponsor and donate some Dakota trucks for this purpose next year.
These projects are not factory projects for Chrysler or for the Natural Resources Canada or the Department of the United States. This is a student project. It's the students who make the decisions. They come up with the designs, they carry them through and put the cars together and get them here to the competition. In the process, they learn all kinds of things about engineering design, teamwork, how to understand how these complex vehicles work, especially the electronics. The team is made up of a variety of engineering disciplines, not just mechanical engineers, but we have electrical engineers, civil engineers, mining engineers, and any student who wants to volunteer and work on the project, they're entitled to do so.
The tanks in our vehicle are very special because we designed the tanks to fit exactly where the stock gasoline tank is, and we made them as compact as possible that you can stand far away from the vehicle and you still won't be able to see the tank underneath there. It's essentially invisible. And that was our philosophy through the entire project, was to make it what we call a transparent conversion. So the driver doesn't know it's a propane-powered vehicle and they can't see the various conversion parts. Ballpark range between 450 and 550 kilometers.
The big thing nowadays is an engineering compromise. You've got to get good efficiency, good performance, and good emissions. So you can't really hit on anyone in particular. If you get great performance, you might lose out on emissions. So you really have to strike a good balance there. And the approach we took was to keep minimal engine modifications while keeping the drivability of the stock vehicle, not going for anything hot rods. A typical minivan driver would drive around. They don't want to notice a difference between the propane and the gasoline vehicle. So what our goal was to get a vehicle that is what it is. It had a well-balanced emissions package, performance, and efficiency, and that gave us the win.
In general, this has meant some great work-type experience for the students. It's a real-world design challenge and design problem with a real set of constraints that we have to solve. Textbooks aren't everything. Reality can be very different, and that's what we learned out of this.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns brake fluid. Just one of the many important characteristics of a good brake fluid is that it have a very high boiling point. DOT3 brake fluid that's recommended for most of today's vehicles has a typical boiling point of 450 degrees Fahrenheit when the fluid's new. But another key feature of brake fluid is that it's hygroscopic, and by that we mean it has the ability to absorb moisture and hold it in suspension. That prevents corrosion from damaging the bores of many of the critical components in our brake system. However, when the brake fluid absorbs that moisture, it also lowers the boiling point. And this DOT3 brake fluid, when it's absorbed as much moisture as it can possibly hold in suspension, its boiling point is lowered from 450 degrees Fahrenheit to 284 degrees Fahrenheit. Down at the wheels, the brakes get exceedingly hot in the summertime, especially, for example, if you're descending grades and using the brakes heavily. You could easily boil the brake fluid, which will cause a loss of brake pedal. The brake pedal could go right to the floor and you wouldn't be able to stop the vehicle. So if you're in any doubt about the life of the brake fluid in your car, have it changed, because over the years it may have absorbed enough moisture to lower that boiling point. Most of today's vehicles have an opaque master cylinder reservoir, and I suggest that during routine underhood inspections, rather than removing the lid and having the possibility of contaminating that brake fluid, you just give the vehicle a shake and observe the fluid level through the side of the master cylinder. That's your Midas tip of the week.
Kenzie's Corner with Jim Kenzie.
In the movie Annie Hall, the Woody Allen character said he couldn't bear to live in California because he couldn't stand to be the resident of a state whose only contribution to culture was the ability to turn right on a red light. Well, in those days, there were several jurisdictions in North America where this was illegal. To my knowledge, the only one left is the province of Quebec. Now, I've asked several people here in Montreal why this is true. And the best answer I've been able to get is the pedestrians wouldn't last 10 minutes. Now, I'm not going to get into a political statement about two solitudes or a distinct society, but driving in Quebec is different than driving in the rest of Canada. The biggest change is the pace. They move faster, they react faster, and you better be ready or you're going to get nailed. On the other hand, Quebecers have the highest seatbelt usage rate of anywhere in North America, and their accident rate is pretty much the same as everywhere else. There are other challenges driving here. Road maintenance is about as bad as it is everywhere, but the lanes on the freeways are narrower, the on and off ramps are shorter, and frankly, I find the signs confusing, and not just because they're in French, because they don't seem to be consistent. Now, will Quebecers ever be able to turn right on a red light? Well, I don't know, but I wish they could, because when you're at the corner of Cavendish and Sherbrooke, and you know that Saint-Hubert barbecue closes at midnight, you want every second you can, otherwise you're going to go without dinner. I'm Jim Kenzie.
Well, this week we met the brand new Jeep TJ, and what's the verdict? Well, thanks to the new coil suspension, the on-road ride comfort is simply light years ahead of the old YJ. But then again, like we said earlier, these babies are happiest out here in the great outdoors. Well, we talked to some real off-roaders from the Jeep Jamboree gang, and they said this new suspension has also increased the capabilities of this new Jeep out here. So if you can make the yuppies happy and you can make the off-roaders happy, you must be doing something right. Oh yes, ever wonder what TJ stands for? Nobody knows. It's one of those code things. Anyway, that's it for now. We'll see you next week for more stories about cars, Jeeps, and the people who drive them.
A lot of the research done in the Air Force and the Navy, they do use live subjects where you've got the healthiest 19 and 20-year-olds in the world, where they put them on sleds and accelerate them, and they use what they call the ouch endpoint. They would take them to the limit of when they said ouch.
TSN's Motoring 96 has been brought to you by Quaker State. The big Q stands for quality, always has, always will, and Midas, the way it should be.